another episode of Postpartum in the Raw. Today we have Alexis Scales with us, who will be sharing a bit of her postpartum story as well as the work she does to support moms with lactation. So, welcome, Alexis. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I am doing great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm very excited to hear about your journey and how that has propelled you into the work that you currently do. So, at the top of at least most of the interviews, I like to ask people before you actually went through your first postpartum experience, did you know anything or have any expectations of postpartum before you came to the table? And if so, how did it differ from what you actually experienced?
So I personally didn't know much, other than like the basics that you see, breastfeeding, the sleepless nights and things like that. I had a lot of friends that had had babies prior to me having my first, and so I guess the parts that I saw with them, everything just looked so easy and like flawless, and it was like just feed baby, baby naps, baby goes to bed. And I feel like that was my expectation going into it, and things were a lot different for me for my first. Um, I don't know if you want me
No,
to
go
go
ahead.
into the
Please share with
specifics.
us.
Okay, so I did have my first daughter in 2018, so she's 5 now. One thing I will say that caught me extremely off guard was I had a C-section,
Mm.
and in my mind, I had this picture perfect birth that I wanted. I wanted to have a natural birth, unmedicated, let her come on her own time. But I started to experience high blood pressure towards the end of my pregnancy. It didn't reach preeclampsia, but they were concerned, that I couldn't get it down from an elevated level. So, um, and they also kind of scared me throughout my pregnancy, which is partly why, I'm doing these interviews and wanting to tell my story, because they told me I know now you can do the blood test to check out and find what the sex of the baby is if you don't want to wait till you can do the anatomy scan. And so I was like, oh my God, I want to find out early. I can have a gender reveal party. And I had asked them to like contact my mom because I didn't want to know. I wanted to be surprised. And they basically told me that the test came back inconclusive. And because I was considered overweight, that inconclusive tests can mean that my baby was going to come with chromosomal issues. And so, as a first time mom, I mean, that was terrifying in itself. And they were like, do you want to redo the test? And now I'm like, of course I do, because now I want to know if baby's going to be okay. I don't even care. Like, it took away from the excitement of finding out the sex of the baby. Like, at that point, I didn't want a gender reveal anymore. I just wanted to know the sex and know that my baby was okay. Like, didn't want anybody else involved but myself. And so that came out fine. They told me, it was still inconclusive. They couldn't confirm, so that we would have to find out when baby was born and through the anatomy scans if she was okay. And also, when I got to that anatomy scan, they started to tell me that they thought she was going to be born with clubbed feet because her feet were turned kind of inwards. And I'm like, how can you tell there's a smushed baby in there? My husband's 6'5" and I'm 5'5". So I'm like, it might just be a big baby or a long baby, all mixed up. So I feel like I lived most of my pregnancy in fear already
Mm.
before she even got here. I just was praying day and night that she came out fine, that, if she wasn't, that God would guide me, to know how to deal with something of that measure, because I wasn't expecting these things. I also felt guilty because they kept talking about my weight being a factor. Um, and so I went into it in a negative state before she was even born. Luckily, she was born, 7 pounds, 6 ounces, 21 inches long, perfectly healthy, feet were normal. And it just dawned on me. I'm like, why would they put someone through all of that without confirmation? They were talking to me about doing like I forgot what the name of it.
Amniocentesis.
Yes, to
Mm.
check in advance and to see. And I was like, no, I don't want you to go through my stomach and check that. Like, at this point, if something's coming, I'm just going to deal with it because that's my baby regardless. I'm not going to take her life, anything like that. Excuse me. But it just really was hard, even when she was born, to really enjoy that moment because I was just so fearful and I was exhausted from the not last 9 months, living in fear. And then to see like she's perfectly normal. Why put me through this trauma unless you really, really had a concern, which I don't feel like there was anything that really would have been like, oh, she has an abnormal heart. Like everything in the anatomy scan was normal, but they still had to keep that buffer, oh, but we can't guarantee she's going to be fine when she comes out. We'll see when she's born. She may have to wear, um, certain boots and things when she's born. And it was just traumatic, really traumatic for me.
You know, Alexis, I can guess certain parts of your story because it's so consistent that it happened. Almost 20 years ago, the same story. Oh, your daughter's gonna have Down syndrome. You need an amniocentesis. She's gonna have this. If that child ain't the most normal, gorgeous, brilliant child on this planet, and it's true. But if you have someone living in fear and stressed for 9 months or 6 months, however long it was into it, why wouldn't your blood pressure be high? And so then the question becomes, what is the purpose? What's the purpose of keeping someone in that space if you cannot confirm,
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
just want to validate your experience. I'm not saying that you're asking for it, but I'm letting you know that that process and that like it's like textbook behavior.
Yeah.
It happens so much, and I'm sorry that you had to experience that. And so how did that affect you emotionally and mentally going into postpartum? Because now you have this baby, you're grateful that she's healthy, but then what?
Yeah, so I will say for the first like 4 days, I just cried. You know, Part of it was a grateful cry that she was here, she was healthy, she was beautiful. I mean, I was just in love. And then part of it was just crying, like, well, what if they miss something? And
Mm.
later on down the line, something comes up that something's wrong. Or, what if there's something wrong with me? And so now I'm second guessing everything. I'm fearful that something would happen when she's sleeping. So I had a hard time like relaxing. When it came to getting rest, I never felt that I was really rested. I didn't trust many people to help me. I kind of just took on the role of motherhood really strongly by myself because I felt like I'm the only one that can protect her. I'm the only one that knows how to keep her safe. And that in turn, I would say probably when she was about 6 to 8 months,
Mhm.
I started to experience really severe postpartum anxiety. And the most extreme part for me was I couldn't even be home by myself with her. In the fear of if something happens, now it's not just me getting out of this house safe. How do I get her out safe? Or what if she stops breathing? How do I call the ambulance and tend to her at the same time? I
Mm.
mean, every possible scenario that you can think of was going through my mind. And it was always negative, always really, really bad, intrusive thoughts. And I remember going to my grandmother's house every day for probably about 6 or 7 months because my husband worked night shifts and I just couldn't be home by myself. So I would go and sit at my grandmother's house every night until probably 12, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah, my husband would come and pick us up. We'd follow him, in my car home. And then from there, it was kind of just, praying that now sleep is okay. Like, if she woke up crying, is she okay? Is it just gas? Is it, so many things that were really affecting me and in turn started to affect my marriage. I mean, it was so many hard times through that postpartum stage and it carried on even into my second pregnancy.
Wow. So how far apart were your pregnancies and experiences?
So my first daughter was 2.5 when my second was born. So I had kind of controlled myself, trying to like eat healthy. I started getting like toxic things out of my daily life, laundry detergents, deodorants, like just trying to find things that would elevate me and my nerves. I kind of dabbled into essential oils and exercise, trying to get out of the house by myself sometimes, what helped a lot. Um, but then when I got pregnant with baby number two, it was just terrifying all over again. Like, are they going to tell me something bad about her? And at this point, I'm like, nope, I want no test. I just want you to check her through this anatomy scan. If that looks fine, that's it. Like, I don't, unless, and I told the doctor, I said, unless there's something of severe concern, do not tell me. I don't want to know because I'll deal with whatever comes on the back end when she's here, you know? And to go in with that mindset, I was fearful of like, even just the relationship with my first, is this going to change? How am I going to love two babies? How it was just an overwhelm becoming a second mom, like not a second mom, a mom to a second child.
Mhm.
And it was just constant fear and anxiety of failing that I feel like from that pregnancy, it was even worse because COVID came when I was pregnant with my second. And so at this point now, I'm not just trying to keep myself sane. I'm trying to keep myself from dying because in the news outlets, if you're pregnant, there's a higher chance that you're going to die from this virus. And I'm like, you know, how do I go to these doctor's appointments then? Do I risk it? Do I sit at home? Like, it was just a really, really hard time, especially for someone who's already dealt with anxiety,
Mhm.
to try to navigate that second time being pregnant.
So I do have a question. Were you like predisposed? Did you ever have a challenge with anxiety prior to your pregnancies?
I don't feel like I had problems with depression,
Okay.
to an extent sometimes. I I don't remember anxiety ever being something that happened for me prior to. I did fall through states of depression sometimes, but the anxiety was just something I had never experienced and didn't. And what was crazy was I didn't even know there was such a thing as postpartum anxiety because all you hear about is depression.
Yeah.
So when they would ask me and the doctor, are you depressed? Are you, thinking of harming yourself or your baby? I'm like, no, I'm fine. But I'm really not fine. It's just a different feeling than what you're asking me, right? And so I was shocked when I found out that people experience anxiety through postpartum.
Yeah. And there's, postpartum OCD, there's
Yeah.
postpartum psychosis, which unfortunately, most often we just find out about when it's in the news and something horrible has happened. But there's a array of perinatal mood disorders that people can experience. And you're right. I think postpartum depression and baby blues has gotten the most attention.
Yeah.
There's like such a spectrum of feelings and experiences that so many folks have. So when you were pretty anxious through your second pregnancy then.
Yeah. From the start.
And so
Absolutely.
did that just roll over into your second postpartum experience, or how was your second postpartum experience?
So I feel like my second postpartum experience, I kind of had to deal with it, um, myself more than I did. Like the traveling to my grandmother's house and things like that, that wasn't an option with COVID, right? You had to stay in your home unless you were going to the grocery store. And at that point, I feel like the anxiety went from postpartum
Mm-hmm.
to, being anxious about if I'm going to die and leave two kids behind. The anxiety was, can I go out and be in public and not bring something back to my kids? I got a newborn. I have a 2-year old. Like it was health at that point. It was postpartum. It was an array of, I did not leave my house until last year.
Oh, wow.
Like the very beginning of last year is when I was like, okay, I can get out. I can start, to find myself again. I started going to therapy because I figured I can't do this by myself. I don't know how to transition these thoughts from extreme anxiety to being able to get back out and experience the world and take my kids out. Like birthday parties were a no go for me. Family coming over, If you were the type to be out without a mask or socializing and things like that, you weren't coming over. If I saw you at a party or the clubs or restaurants, you weren't coming over. I mean, it was extreme for me. Like, in my house was my safe haven, right? So I didn't allow people to come in here. If people wanted to visit, we were visiting outside. But this was my safe spot. You couldn't come in here. And so I felt like it transitioned from just postpartum to an overall anxiousness of life. Like, I was just anxious of the worst thing happening, and health seemed to be my number one, because I just felt like I was overweight. This pandemic was taking people out that were overweight. It was taking people out that were pregnant. It was like, once I got from one stage of being okay, then the next stage took over my mental. So it was a very hard postpartum period for me with baby number two.
Wow. And so I'm typically asking what the role of community is in all of this. And it sounds like your grandmother and maybe perhaps some other people were a part of your community the first go round. But with the isolation that you experienced during COVID straight through last year,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't, who was your support system? Was your husband your only support system in that time?
He was, and a lot of times it was hard for him to even understand the things that I needed. Like, if I explained to him, and it wasn't anything as him not being a supportive partner, right? But he just didn't get it. Like, he would say things like, "Oh, just calm down," or "It'll be okay, stop thinking like that." And I would say, if it was that simple, I wouldn't be in this state, right? I would be able to cut it off. If I could cut it off, trust me, I would cut it off. But I was like, it's not that easy. And I kept saying, I don't know how. Like, I don't know how not to think like this anymore. And so that's when I told myself, okay, I have to go find a person on the outside that can kind of help me figure this thing out, because what I'm doing now is not working.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So this journey, what did it teach you?
It taught me to love myself. One, I do feel like I lost a lot of who I was, through becoming a mother. Um, I stopped doing things that I enjoyed. My sole focus was my children. I didn't get out the house much. I didn't exercise, take care of myself. So when I started to feel these things, I kind of just had to step back and really figure out what it was that I needed. And oftentimes I didn't ask myself that. I'd be like, what does my baby need? What does my house need? What does my husband need? Even sometimes, what does my aunt, my mom, my grandmother, like, everybody was before me, myself. And I felt like that was a lot of my struggles, because I was taking on everybody else and never dealing with the struggles that I had deep down.
Yeah.
And so I did start to tell my husband, like, I need an hour to step out, even if it's just to go browse at Walmart or Target. Or I did start getting back into going and getting my nails done once a month, and, just having time to decompress, because oftentimes sitting in my thoughts made it even worse because of the overwhelming. Like, I still worked a 9 to 5. I was taking care of kids. I was, being a wife, taking care of the household. And then on top of that, I'm struggling. So it was like, who's going to be worried about my struggles? I kept thinking, like, who's going to think about me? And I had to say, well, stop for a second and think about yourself. Like, what is it that you really need to get out of this space, And that was my first step, I think, is really just finding things that I loved again, like music and um, creative things like drawing and creating digital things. It's kind of how I transitioned into some of the things that I do now. But I just really had to sit back and ask myself what would make me happy again, and how can I put those bad thoughts on the back burner.
Yeah. And that's so important, um, if we don't love ourselves and we don't advocate for ourselves, so often for so many of us, there's no one else that can do it better.
Yeah.
And, when we do it and we start making changes and creating boundaries, then others are maybe on board at that point. But it has to start with us, right? We've got to love ourselves enough to take a pause and fill our cup, because that's a lot. You said 9 to 5 job. You're being a mom. You're being a wife. You're also managing your household.
Yeah.
That's like 4 separate full-time jobs.
It is.
And so it's like, but then we'll go, oh, we'll beat ourselves up because we're not doing everything perfectly with every hair neatly in place, where it's like, be real. It's 4 full-time jobs, and that's okay.
Right.
That we're struggling a little bit in these moments. So you mentioned that you began therapy after your second, or during your second postpartum experience. How was that helpful, or how did that impact how you navigated that season?
So surprisingly, I realized that I did experience anxiety prior to becoming a mom. It just
Mm-hmm.
looked different. And so I didn't really know like where it came from. I never thought that I had experienced something like this, but it was in different levels. It was just a different type of anxiety that I've dealt with now through postpartum. And so a lot of it through therapy that helped me was just having someone to listen, and having someone that didn't give me the response of just stop thinking like that, or everything's going to be okay. Like, she validated my feelings. Everything that you're feeling is normal. Everything that you're experiencing is normal. Do you have to feel like this, or do we want you to feel like this? Absolutely not. But it is normal. People go through this and you can get out of it. And that was like the biggest thing for me, is knowing that I'm not going to be like this forever, because it scared me. I'm like, sometimes it was exhausting to constantly be pre-planning your exit if something happens. Like, I would do it at the grocery stores, I would do it in my house, I would do it at someone else's house. Like, it's so many things I feel that go on in the world that scare you. And when you have to be in charge of 2 other little humans, like, even when I started to get back out in the world, I wouldn't take them with me, because it would be like, well, if something happens to me, then something happens to me. But if something happens to them, I could never live with myself again, like. And so I would leave them at home with my husband or my mother-in-law, and I would go out and just go get groceries or go. And then my daughter would start to ask, like, hey, I want to go to the store, or I want to go to Target, or, and then I'd say, well, I can't do this forever, right? I'm keeping her from experiencing life because of my own fears. And, I don't want to mess her up psychologically either, because she's confined to being at home. They haven't been in daycare. They've been at home with me and a nanny. So, like, I've just tried to protect them as much as I can on my front. But the therapist had slowly started to teach me, like, you're not living, you're not giving them a life. They need to experience things, and they will get sick. It's normal. That was like my biggest thing. Like, no, I don't want to get sick. And eventually we got COVID, and yes, we had some fevers and some downtime, but luckily we survived.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big eye opener. Like, I didn't die, like, it's okay to be out there. And I wasn't even out there when it happened. My husband brought it home from work. So it was like, you're doing all this and it could still come in your house, with your husband. So the therapy just really helped, because it's a non-biased opinion.
Yeah.
It's someone that doesn't live in your house every day. It's someone that literally is listening to your struggles and trying to help you work your way through it, instead of kind of brushing it under the table.
I love that. So how did these experiences change your life and change your path?
One, I would say that the mental state where I didn't want them to go to school and things like that, I started my own business in 2021. And I actually started it as a virtual assistant. And I was just helping people, because what I've done in corporate America for the last, 10, 15 years is just what I knew. So I was like, why not do this for myself, make some extra money, be able to hopefully quit my job, because I had seen so many people that were doing this, social media, VA work, So I started dabbling in that. And then I was like, okay, I really don't want to return back to work working a 9 to 5. Like all my life, I've said I meant to be an entrepreneur. I just never knew how I was going to get there or what my purpose was to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And so I had invested in this business coach, and she's like talking to me, and she's, breaking down like, where do we want to be in the next couple years and things like that. Where do I want my business to go from here? And I sat back and I'm like, I don't know. This is just supposed to be like, a little fun thing on the side. And she was like, I challenge you to sit by yourself in your thoughts at your table and write down all the things that you're passionate about, the things that you love, the things that make you happy. And as I'm writing that evening, in my notebook, my kids are out with my husband, and I'm just, writing all my thoughts down. Everything circled around motherhood. Everything was, this is your purpose. I get chills just talking about it. This is your passion. This is the thing that you love. Like becoming a mom. Yes, I've had my trials and my tribulations, but those things that I've experienced now have given me the knowledge to help other women walk differently through it. And so my biggest thing at first that I thought of was like, what was my favorite part of motherhood? And it's like breastfeeding was such a journey and a bond with both of my daughters. I breastfed my first for 2 years and my second for 2.5. So I've breastfed for 4.5 years, just about. And I just was like, I've helped friends and I've helped, coworkers and things that were going through their breastfeeding journey. And at this point, I'm just helping because it's what I know, the things that I've tried, my own research. And I was like, no, I need to do this for a living. Like, I would love to help women do this every day. And so I started working on my certification at the beginning of last year.
I love that. I think it's so beautiful because it's like you turned your pain and your trauma into purpose and something that is helpful to others in the greater community. And I applaud when I see that happen, and have even for myself had to be like, hold on, because you made it through.
Mm.
And you made it through and able to help and talk and share and coach other people. And if you haven't, like, I want you to know, like, that's special. That's amazing.
Thank you.
It's brave. It's courageous. It's not.
You don't think about it like that.
Doing that stuff.
Yeah.
No, to be able to share your story and to be able to get into the trenches with other parents as they're going through it is brave.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you made it and that's the path that you're taking. So can you share with our audience a bit about your company, what you're doing, and where they can find you?
Yes, absolutely. So my company name is Motherhood Milk and More because I didn't want to just tie it just around milk. It's about everything, the experience of motherhood from pregnancy all the way through postpartum and beyond postpartum. That's my goal through creating this business. The lactation is something that I started out with, but from that, the ideas have just flown. And so I also am a postpartum support coach, helping women through their postpartum stages, things like anxiety or depression or just typical conversation. I've created a community of women to help support each other, to help each other walk through their journey of motherhood. And so my platform is the same everywhere. For Instagram, it's Motherhood Milk and More. My website is motherhoodmilkandmore.com. And I have a free Facebook community as well that is Motherhood Milk and More. If you come in and just join, it's a beautiful group of women that just come in and support each other. And we have a new series that'll be starting up soon to just chat about motherhood from different aspects, whether it's you don't want to return to work or you're struggling through motherhood, like anything of no topic is off the table. So
I love that. But yeah, it's amazing.
Thank you.
I am so grateful for those of you that have listened in today and for all of what Alexis has shared in a very vulnerable and open way. So thank you, Alexis, for sharing with us. Thank
Absolutely.
you to everyone who is listening. As you know, you can look out for us weekly on this podcast. And if there's any particular topics that you want us to cover, please just drop a comment, share, subscribe. But thank you, most of all, thank you for listening in and sharing this time with us. Talk to you guys soon.